Hello, new wavers. I just noticed my eye is bloodshot. That's not good. Full disclaimer. It is a full moon. I am also pretty sleep deprived. So get ready to see probably one of the most unhinged versions of myself that you have probably ever seen on YouTube. Next to my What's in My Bag challenge that I did with 0 hours of sleep. Also, thank you all so much for such wonderful feedback. The amount of people that watched it, the amount of people that liked, shared. I cannot thank you enough for encouraging me to keep going after episode 1 of 6 Feet Deep Dive. Episode 2, however, is gonna have a little bit different of a vibe. Let's go to a place that is near and dear to my heart, New Orleans. Also known as the Big Easy and the Crescent City. I have had a love affair with this city for probably over a decade. The food, the history, the culture, And if you've never been, trying to find words to describe such a magical city is next to impossible. You almost have to just go there yourself and experience it. You have to go to New Orleans and just feel its energy. But don't go to Bourbon Street. I actually nearly moved to the city once upon a time, but the city is obviously rich in history, both joyful and terrifying. It's known for its massive and overwhelming Mardi Gras celebrations every late February, early March. It's known for its impeccable architecture. It's known for its endless amount of food options, but it also has a very dark and macabre underbelly to it. Hurricane Katrina.
Along the eastern side of the Industrial Canal, the levees now suffer an explosive break.
A very high crime rate.
7 French Quarter homicides within 5 months.
I don't go out after a certain hour at night.
It has residents in the French Quarter adjusting their comings and going.
Endless counts of rumored vampirism.
Do I really need the blood? I do.
Madame Delphine Lalaurie, who was actually portrayed by Kathy Bates in American Horror Story Coven.
Get off my property.
The voodoo priestess herself, Madame Marie Laveau, who was also portrayed in American Horror Story Coven by Angela Bassett.
Cordelia promised Papa Legba the darkest and most corrupt voodoo queen soul for mine.
The list of New Orleans lore could go on and on and on. I could literally just dedicate a channel to New Orleans, or at least an entire episode. But a certain account that I'm going to talk about today didn't happen during the French Revolution. It didn't happen during the Civil War. It didn't happen during the Victorian era. It instead happened in late 2015. Episode 2 of 6 Feet Deep Dive is dedicated to the modern day New Orleans grave robber who was arrested in July of 2016 for stealing human remains. Now, you may remember breaking news of New Orleans grave robbing a few years ago. I remember friends who were in New Orleans who were posting about this person who not only stole human bones, but also had the audacity to try and sell them online. Lovingly called BONEGHAZI by the internet, this is exactly what we will take our second deep dive into tonight. Welcome to 6 Feet Deep Dive. God, I'm so pale. Goth problems. I will start this deep dive episode by saying that I identify as a witch. I know, shocking. I do spells, I do magic. I do not do hexes on people because I believe in karma. Essentially, I view being a witch as a conduit from Earth to the universe. I also know that the art of witchcraft, or paganism in general, tends to draw in, not all the time, because there are some very even-keeled, sane witches that I know personally. But sometimes, I'll say, witchcraft draws in very mentally unwell people. Not that I'm a saint by any means. But let's take, for instance, one of these mentally unwell people that I'm talking about who are attracted to witchcraft. Their name is Ender Darling. They identify as queer and non-binary. In 2015, they were a New Orleans local, and at the time, they were 24 years old. It all started with a faithful Facebook post. There's a Facebook private group called the Queer Witch Collective, and Ender Darling actually posted in this Queer Witch Collective Facebook group December 8th, 2015. Ender Darling posts in the group the following.
About 20 minutes away from my house in New Orleans is what we call the poor man's graveyard.
Yes, the poor man's graveyard.
Most graveyards around here are full of above-ground graves because we live in a fishbowl, but there happens to be a graveyard where it's all in-ground graves, for those of us who are too poor to afford above-ground burial.
I may or may not intentionally be making Ender Darling's voice sound like Donald Trump.
When it rains, of course, bones wash up. The older the grave, the more you can find. You can literally walk around and see femurs, teeth, jaws, skull caps, etc., etc. This is where I go to find my human bones. For curse work and general spells that require bone. I find human bones are easier for work with me rather than animal bone. I can relate and work with the energy they carry, if that makes sense. Anyways, I wanted to see if I started selling, basically cover shipping to wherever you happen to be, if people would be interested, ? You know, human bones aren't easy to come by, and I usually have leftovers. I only go once a month, or when it rains here.
What's wrong with me? Before we unpack this lovely post, I have to tell you that if you are unfamiliar with New Orleans, the cemeteries of more economically advantaged people are above ground, such as St. Louis Cemetery. The soil in New Orleans, or just South Louisiana in general, is too fine to bury people below the ground. The city is, after all, in a fishbowl, and it's in the swamp. So for one to be buried in this city with the absolute guarantee that their bodies won't be washed away whenever it floods or whenever it rains or whenever there's a dumbass grave robber trying to sell their bones online. Ugh. Anyway, if one needs to be buried above ground, they have to be pretty economically advantaged because the above ground graves are made out of concrete and I believe steel. But because of the above ground graves cost, which is significantly higher because you literally need concrete to be buried, this presents a problem for economically disadvantaged people in New Orleans. I heard from a New Orleans local that over half of the city is below poverty line. Half of New Orleans is below the poverty line. So therefore, not everyone can exactly afford to be buried above ground in a really expensive concrete tomb. So what Ender Darling was actually saying was that there were pauper cemeteries very close to their house, and I believe this was the mid-city section of New Orleans. And they were not only wanting to steal the bones of people who could not afford above ground graves, but also sell them online to strangers. My blood is boiling. Anyway, the first few comments of this post were lukewarm or cautionary at best. Someone warned Ender Darling on their post to be careful of state laws. Someone was finally brave enough to sorta call Ender Darling out and basically ask Ender Darling if they were offering any payment to the graveyard. Ender Darling replied saying,
"Me and my goddess have a pact. She provides the bones. I only take what the earth gives, and I leave offerings. China."
Finally, more and more people commented on this really privileged and honestly really abhorrent Facebook post. After much resistance from this group, as the post just basically sat there and cooked, Ender Darling finally responded.
"Do not shame me for my work. Someone needs to learn about witchcraft, it seems."
Honey, or darling.
No, honey. I kept my mouth shut. Bitch. Is that better? Is bitch better?
They're not shaming you for your work, but they are shaming you for stealing bones from people that could not afford a burial above ground. Ugh. And after having spent much time in New Orleans and knowing generally where the cemetery was, these bones were probably from people of color who were too marginalized to be buried in a concrete cemetery, along with the city's more privileged population. Y'all can tell I'm so annoyed. So the admins of this Facebook group where Ender Darling posted this wonderful post, they were supposed to basically intervene and say, hey, this is not okay. I'm pretty sure that admins actually have the power to delete posts if they go against the rules of the group. But instead of doing the decent thing, like seeing that Ender Darling is obviously super privileged and doing something frankly very wrong, they came to their defense! They came to Ender Darling's defense. Basically saying that they found it sad that people thought that what Ender Darling was doing very publicly was grave desecration. Instead, basically used the rationale that what Ender Darling was doing was taking up what was already being washed up from the earth. And basically saving the bones from going to waste treatment. Oh, Lord. Finally, the people in this Facebook group started to call out the group moderators, saying that the group moderators of Queer Witch Collective were in fact implementing white supremacy and colonialism. Finally. Now, to stay with this narrative and look at this whole thing systemically, I'm not about to make excuses for Ender Darling, but let's look at what was happening in the world, particularly in the United States, in late 2015. Trayvon Martin had been fatally shot by a policeman in 2012 in Sanford, Florida. Also in 2012 was the fatal shooting of Rakia Floyd by an off-duty police officer in Chicago. Michael Brown had been fatally shot in 2014 in Ferguson, Missouri. Also in 2014, Eric Garner had been unalived through a chokehold by a policeman in Staten Island. By 2013, the Black Lives Matter movement had been formed, and by 2015, I remember personally, it was in the widespread public consciousness. Now, Facebook users are usually sanctimonious, self-righteous, and holier than thou. But in this instance, and that's probably one of the only times I agree with Facebook users, in this instance, they were 100% spot on to not only call Ender Darling out on their fuckery, but to also call out the group moderators for not condemning, but promoting it. So the Facebook group, the Queer Witch Collective, was becoming increasingly uneasy as more and more people were noticing just how wrong it was for Ender Darling to make this post, but also the moderators who were defending them. The Queer Witch Collective actually saw many of its members leave almost overnight. Understandably so. Finally, some kind person actually screenshotted Ender Darling's post in the Queer Witch Collective group, saying, "This is a public alert. Seriously, anyone know this little shithead? Better tell them to stay the fuck out of Holt Cemetery or their bones might get broken. I am not joking. Please spread the word and keep a lookout for yet another cultural vulture." Sounds like the name of a song. But this post essentially went viral, and it actually got the attention of several New Orleans news and media outlets. Meanwhile, on Tumblr, so we're moving away from Facebook and we're going to Tumblr. But meanwhile on Tumblr, a user named Pastel Prouver found Ender Darling's Tumblr account and publicly called them out, saying, "PSA, Tumblr user Little Effing Monster is stealing human bone from cemeteries in Louisiana. Please don't let them get away with this and spread the word /signal boost." So while I'm not a Tumblr user myself, I do know that with any social media account, you can go viral. And this post that Pastel Prouver actually posted, publicly calling out Ender Darling and their fuckery, actually went viral. It was memed. I believe the post was shared either 30 or 40,000 times. So after the post on Facebook and the post on Tumblr both went viral, Ender Darling actually deleted their Tumblr account because of harassment and created a backup Tumblr account called Effing Heathen. So they posted on their backup account a very lengthy defense as to what they were doing and essentially explaining and justifying the thing that they were being publicly called out for. Absolutely no apology. And trust me, I looked. Even though they were calling Ender Darling out for desecration, stealing human bones, white supremacy, culture vulture, which is still my favorite, Ender Darling basically said that instead of an apology, they were saving the bones, like the Facebook moderators of the Queer Witch Collective actually were saying. So if you actually read this very lengthy post, you don't need to be a psychotherapist to actually see that Ender Darling is actually very mentally ill. And as a psychotherapist myself, I know that when people who are mentally ill or just mentally unstable, when they get called out for things or when somebody tries to set a boundary with them for essentially doing something problematic, these mentally unstable people tend to over-justify what they're doing and also double down on their actions. And that is exactly what Ender Darling does here. And also, Ender Darling said, well, other people do it. Oh, sorry.
Well, other people do it.
Ender Darling basically said in this post that they are not a white fluffy witch, and why aren't the fraternities that do it, why don't they get called out? I mean, they do have a point, let's be honest. I know exactly what Ender Darling was doing in these defenses, was to try to deflect, was to try to blame shift, was to try to victimize themselves. I see you.
I see you. We good. Okay. We good. I see. We see each other. We see each other. We good.
And so finally, after the post went viral on Facebook, after the post went viral on Tumblr, after Ender Darling deleted their Tumblr account and made another one to not apologize but over-justify themselves, after Ender Darling was called out for just basically being a shit human being, the police were finally called. So on January 28th, 2016, Ender Darling's home was actually raided by police that was also nearby the cemetery in Mid-City. The police found 11 bones and 4 teeth, and also some illegal substances. Ender Darling even showed the police where the bones were on their altar. But as they were showing the police the bones, they said to them,
"They're probably human bones in there, but I know better than to give you that answer."
I did not intend on talking like Donald Trump as Ender Darling, but here we are. Thank you, full moon. Thank you, sleep deprivation. So due to even more harassment in person, Ender Darling actually fled Louisiana and moved to Tampa, Florida with their daughter. But a bioarchaeological analysis confirmed that the bones in Ender Darling's home were in fact human. Surprise! Ender Darling was arrested July 15th, 2016, over 6 months after they made the heinous post on Facebook. And while Ender Darling was in custody, they for some reason confessed to the police that they had been removing bones for over a month before they even made the Facebook post. And they also admitted to taking bones from other cemeteries in other states like Maryland. Quality people. Ender Darling's trial came, and they pled guilty to theft of New Orleans cemetery bones, as well as marijuana possession. They were charged with a 5-year suspended sentence and were able to walk free that day. And that, New Waivers, is the lore behind BONEGHAZI. I have to say out loud that 2 things can be true at the same time. 1, this person is obviously mentally ill. And being a queer person myself, I get having trauma triggers. I get that we're more prone to mental illness than the next straight person. The fact that they were not only stealing bones from impoverished people who were buried, but they also had to be pretty unstable to go online on Facebook of all places and post that they had human bones that they were going to sell. And also bragging on a Facebook group, private or not, bragging to people saying that you have direct access to bones when it rains, which is pretty much all the time in New Orleans, also implies some mental instability. We all go a little mad sometimes.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Here's my other truth. Mental instability or not, from one queer person to another, you are making me look bad. And from a witch's perspective, you are also making me look bad. Because people see that, which made national headlines, by the way, and they think that me, a witch, is going to go out and dig up people's bones from marginalized populations. Like, ooh! In what world do you think it's okay to steal? Yes, steal the bones from people of color. Don't you think that the people of color in New Orleans have had enough. After, you know, things like, I don't know, slavery and Jim Crow and even Hurricane Katrina, those awful events didn't click in your mind when you just woke up one day and said, I'm gonna go steal the bones of black people. And why do you have to make it worse by not only desecrating a graveyard, but what about the families of the people who were buried there? Did you think about that? What about the deceased who are not alive to defend themselves and say, don't fucking take my bones? And also the families of the people who were deceased. Can you imagine how it would feel if families basically found out that their dead relatives' bones were stolen by you? This makes all witches look sad, pathetic, and frankly deviant. We already get such a bad reputation anyway. All we're trying to do is live our lives. Sans stolen human remains. Anyway, I'll get off my high horse now. Like I said, I remember hearing about this years ago, and I felt utterly repulsed by it. And for those of you who don't know, the city was furious. And of all the cities in the country, you do not want to mess with the people of New Orleans. Here comes this person who's not even from New Orleans originally.
She doesn't even go here.
And they have the gall and the wherewithal to steal the bones of native New Orleanians. To try to sell them online! To try to sell them online! This makes me just so upset, as all of you can see. I usually am not this unhinged, but I don't know. Fuck the sleep deprivation in the full moon. This just really gets my goat. And they were defended by the group's moderators instead of just deleting the posts and kicking Ender Darling out. I actually looked up Ender Darling because I was curious, and very soon after all this happened, like some of their posts I saw from like late 2016, so after they had been arrested and pled guilty, they were posting this is why I can't with some people. They were posting this picture and this picture on their timeline. Like, Ender Darling, I say this really with all tea, I was about to say no tea, no shade. All tea, all shade. I hope that you have since gotten the help that you have needed for quite a while now. Whew, I'm getting verklempt. Anyway, I digress. If you are interested or emotionally involved in this little passion project of mine called 6 Feet Deep Dive, or if you want to keep seeing me post paranormal investigations, please like, comment, share, and most importantly, if we vibe, subscribe. Mwah.